Language is a complex system of communication that consists of words, written or spoken, so-called verbal means, signs, so-called non-verbal means that serve as verbal means, for example in a sign language or braille. Then we have body language, which is non-verbal means, and voice, the tone of voice, rhythm, tempo, that are so-called paraverbal means. Both non-verbal communication, body language, and paraverbal communication make up prosody. It's prosody that gives us the idea about the real meaning behind the words, behind the language semantics. The blind are deprived of the visual stimuli, non-verbal means, but are more sensitive to auditory stimuli, paraverbal means, whereas the deaf are more sensitive to the visual stimuli, since they cannot receive the auditory input. Verbal means are produced and received in form of auditory stimuli, oral language, visual stimuli, written language or signs. Non-verbal means are expressed with visual stimuli or touch stimuli, like in braille, whereas paraverbal means are expressed with auditory stimuli. Each of the stimuli is received by a different body part: auditory stimuli by ears, visual stimuli by eyes, and touch stimuli by hands or feet. But the main interpreter of these stimuli is the brain. On the whole, language is entirely dependent on the neocortex. In the human brain, the neocortex is the largest part of the cerebral cortex, which covers the two cerebral hemispheres and is made up of 6 layers. Without it, we can't understand or produce a language. In over 95% of humans, it's the left hemisphere that is dominating and required for language production. Language can be divided into following processes translated by the brain: production in form of oral, written or sign means, reception of a given stimulus that involves receiving and decoding of the stimulus, storage and recall of the stimulus that involves memory. All of these processes involve attention, and each of the above processes employs specific brain parts. Let's take a closer look. It's not only what the speaker says, the semantic contents, but also how he or she says it. The tone of voice, rhythm, tempo, gestures and body language play a main role in how we receive the message and what pragmatic meaning we attribute to the message. Both reception and production involve cognition. Cognition means our thoughts, emotions, motivation, memory, and our executive function, that is our perception, reaction with others, and our actions, meaning response. All of these are governed by the cerebral cortex. We form thoughts of what we want to achieve in a communication process. What emotions are attached to both receiving and producing the information influences how we react to the given information and what action we take. Both production and reception are connected to storage and recall of previous information units. Storage and recall are related to memory. We have 3 types of memory: sensory, that lasts about 1 second and involves all 5 senses; short-term, so-called working memory, which is what's happening in a given moment, maximum about 30 seconds. When you're exposed to a new information, for example a new word or a linguistic structure, you need to repeat it a few times, otherwise you'll forget it. Long-term memory is another type of memory. It's also called lifetime memory, and this is divided into explicit memory, conscious, and implicit memory, unconscious. Implicit memory is in charge of skills and tasks. Its subset is procedural memory. As for the language, it can involve translating skills or skills to learn a new language when you already know a few others from the same language family. Explicit memory, often referred to as declarative memory, is in charge of facts and events. The memory responsible for facts is called semantic. As for the linguistic knowledge, you can remember the word meanings and attach the right meanings to a word. Episodic memory is responsible for events and experiences. In linguistics, it can be negative connotations to certain words or phrases based on your prior experiences, or your negative experiences that form stereotypical thoughts which you express with certain linguistic means. The part of the brain that is responsible for a transition of a working memory to a long-term memory is the hippocampus. From there, the information travels to the neocortex. In case of semantic memory, all the information is stored in the neocortex and doesn't go back to the hippocampus. But first, the information must pass from the sensory memory into the short-term memory via the process of attention. Attention is a cognitive process in which we are exclusively concentrating on the stimulus of our interest and ignoring other stimuli at a given time. For example, when we want to understand a sentence, we need to keep in mind the beginning of the sentence while the rest of the sentence is read or heard. This task is carried out by the short-term memory. Another example is simultaneous translation, when the interpreter is storing information in one language while orally translating it into another. The frontal lobe is responsible for expressive language, organization, concentration and attention. There we find one of the main language areas, Broca's area, which is responsible for language production. Above Broca's area there is a prosody area. The temporal lobe perceives and recognizes verbal material. It's in charge of hearing, understanding a language, receptive language, organization and sequencing, and memory. The left temporal area includes production of speech, naming and verbal memory. The right temporal area includes foreign languages, visual memory, and understanding and comprehension of the environment. Injury to the upper temporal area can cause that someone may misunderstand the meanings of words and body language. The temporal lobe houses the primary auditory cortex and Wernicke's area, another important language area involved in understanding a language. Language reception. The parietal lobe is largely responsible for language. Injury may result in inability to read or write. The occipital lobe is the area where the visual cortex is located. As for the language, this part of the brain is in charge of reading, perception and recognition of printed words.